Rob's child, nothing I say is investment advice. Welcome back to my series on Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor, where we review every chapter of this book. We're using the 1972 revised edition. Link below to read it yourself and watch the video after you read it. I'm here to review the contents of the chapter, maybe explain some things that are hard to understand, and also connect it with what I've learned in security analysis, as well as update the lessons and how they fit in today's economy and issues with investing and trying to be an intelligent investor today in 2024. Our chapter today in this episode is Chapter 10, The Investor and His Advisors. So we go over the various places and people and ways people get advice about how they should invest. So the chapter begins with saying that investing is for profit, and it's not a normal business operation to pick securities. In other words, when you're dealing with trying to make your business better, if you own a shop or whatever, it's not a normal operation in business to be trying to figure out how to make your profits better. It's more about making your business better. But investing is really just for, making profits. And there's an interesting difference between those two things. And then we list the various sources of advice, and he breaks down each one of these, including, the fact that you can get information from family, friends, professionals, news, all sorts of places. And then I have a 3-star quoted point here. If the investor is to rely chiefly on the advice of others in handling his funds, then either he must limit himself and his advisors strictly to standard, conservative, and even unimaginative forms of investment, or he must have an unusual, intimate, and favorable knowledge of the person who is going to direct his funds into other channels. If not standard, conservative, or even unimaginative forms of investment, then the investor is being aggressive, not defensive. I'll add to that one of the most unimaginative forms of conservative investment is probably the 60-40 portfolio. If you don't know about it, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. SPY, an ETF, anyone can do it, and BND, just regular bonds. And if SPY goes way up, you sell some of it, put it in bonds. If it goes the other way, SPY shrinks, you take some of the bond money out and put it in SPY. Rebalance it every 6 months. Like, that would be a very defensive, normal, conservative, unimaginative form of investment that, typically over time will achieve pretty good results. And I think that's an important thing to realize. And then if you want to be more aggressive, just realize that you're being more aggressive, and realize where your competence is, where you can have an edge, where you can maybe perform better than the defensive investor. And or like he's saying here, if there's a person that's managing or giving you advice, to make sure that person really knows that specific field really well. So if it's specific uranium stocks or something like that, and it's the uranium expert, you can go see him. I think that's kind of where this is going. He says no more than 10% of typical managed money of a big corporate manager will be outside of solid stocks and bonds, including trying to take advantage of market swings. So he's basically saying 90% of your typical investment strategy form person that manages your money, 90% should be boring, really boring, like plain old bonds and plain old stocks. He goes into a little bit more detail with that later in the chapter. So 90% there, and then if you want to have fun, 10%, You think gold's going to go up, put it in gold. You think Bitcoin's going to go to the moon, put it in Bitcoin, if you think the whole market is going to be going up, you can adjust how much you have in stocks versus bonds, with 10%. I think that's kind of where he's going with that. And this is how typically the big guys do it. And he does say that, having a big firm basically manage your stuff is generally the way to go. That's later in the chapter, though. So then we discuss various sources of information, some defensive sources, some speculative sources. He mentions one thing about people that try to predict markets like me on Rothschild's channel. Delphic phrasing. Basically what it means is being able to go back and say, yeah, hey, I said that was coming. I said that was going to happen. I said that was going to happen. In my crystal ball videos, I at least try to include times when I was wrong, balanced with times I was right, instead of just claiming to be right all the time, as you'll find people do. They'll, even professionals, they don't want to look bad, so they want to talk about the good choices they made and leave the bad ones out. And so anyway, moving on. A quote here, their financial advisory services, interpretations and forecasts of business conditions of, I don't know what this is, of the intelligent investor course are much more authoritative and informing than predicting stock prices. So in other words, it's not a bad idea to get a sense of where business conditions are, in regard to maybe an industry, and that's something financial advisory services can successfully do for you. And, but they can't predict what, if the stock price is going to go up over the next few months or, 6 months, up or down. And that shouldn't be something that people seek from advisory services. And then he notes the claims that if favorable or unfavorable conditions come, it is a signal to buy or sell regardless of price. The emphasis here is on regardless of price. And this is one of Graham's biggest things, is that there's no such thing as no price is too high or no price is too low, depending on if the conditions are favorable or unfavorable. There's always going to be eventually a level of margin of safety, and that's the whole last chapter. That's kind of the coup de grace, I guess, of the whole book, is the last chapter of the whole book. But yeah, and so, but a lot of people don't use that. A lot of people, they see AI expanding, they're like, yeah, NVIDIA is great, and they're gonna, this is very favorable conditions. But if you were to say that, you would be disregarding the price completely. As I've talked about in many videos right now, June 2024, NVIDIA itself is trading at, 3 or 4 times as much as a normal business should cost, based on the amount of earnings that it's making. So, don't just use favorable or unfavorable conditions. You do have to consider the current price and how it relates, and that's all. That's just PE ratios, of current PE and past PE. Moving on, the intelligent investor doesn't buy or sell based on suggestions, but will use the info for help. And he says this over and over again in the chapter. Basically, any information that you're getting about a stock or a security, an intelligent investor doesn't just say, oh yeah, that guy said that that's good, and they just blindly buy it. They do their research, they figure out the valuation, they figure out their own idea of what they think about it. They don't just go off of what other people say. Then we have a section on advice from brokerage houses. There's a footnote mentioning CFAs being studied more modernly, and how they're unfortunately do not analyze stocks. A CFA is a certified financial analyst, and there was a survey done apparently since this edition was written, showing that a lot of most CFAs, I guess, don't follow Graham's methods, and they focus really too much on growth and not enough on safety. And it was mentioned as well in the footnotes, I believe, that this is all while Graham himself was a big part of making CFAs a real thing. He was one of the things out there saying, yeah, we need these kinds of people and they need to be good at what they do. And it sounds like, according to this edition of this book, that hasn't actually played out completely favorably. It's too bad we don't have Graham around today still. But anyway, I digress. When we have mentions that security analyst is very different than a market analyst. And so this is, this book is not about analyzing markets and where the markets can go. It's funny, if you can predict markets, the whole market, you can make way more money than you could ever make in simple security and analysis. Some people can do it and have done it in the past, and like he said, even in this book, that it's just rare. It takes a lot to be able to do that, and that's not what this book is about. This is about security analysis, which is his whole thing. That's the book, from 1940. And that's what we're doing here. We're not looking to try to predict if the whole market's going to go down or up, which it will go down or up. What we're doing is trying to find individual securities, like this stock or this bond is like clearly undervalued and it's going to be fine, even if the market goes down and the value of what you're buying goes down. It's okay because it's safe and it makes money. That's the whole point of all of this. Moving on, he says good investors know how to ask a stock analyst the right questions, and they don't include short-term quotation expectations. That's what I got out of reading that section. So the right questions are, is this company safe? Is it safe? Is it cheaper than it might be expected to be? Is it below what's a normal value? Is it at a good price? Questions like that are good questions to ask a stock analyst, not where is it going to go up in the next month or two. That's not a useful question, and a good stock analyst doesn't have a good answer to that either. To add to that, like Graham always says, stock quotations, the price of any stock or security or group of stocks, is a voting machine, not a weighing machine. It's what people think it's worth today, and it often has nothing to do with how much it actually weighs. It's a voting mechanism more than anything else. So anyway, moving on, we have a discussion on failed brokerages, and then there was a good footnote, mentioning, hey, don't worry about this too much. We now have the SIPC, which protects a lot of investors. If a brokerage goes under, then there's insurance basically that you won't lose all your stuff. And then we have a section on investment bankers. He generally likes them, but he says, you can use them and buy new issues, but you really need to judge yourself as far as the quality and the price of new issues go. As you mentioned earlier in the book, during big like stock market booms, you tend to get more and more companies selling stocks that are more and more worthless and that really are not very safe, and extremely speculative, and selling at like ridiculously high prices. So yeah, that's how that all fits together. And then we have a section on other advisors as the last section. He said, this is an important, I should put some stars here. There we go. A lot of free advice is bad, including from family, friends, or YouTube channels like Rob's Child. Like I always say, never investment advice on this channel. And then the last section, summary of the chapter. Basically, to summarize everything we went through in the chapter, regular people may wisely have professional management by well-established and well recommended investment counsel firm. This will not get exceptional results, but commensurate with those of the average well-informed and cautious investor. So basically saying, you can be at ease if you have a well-established, well-recommended investment counsel firm guiding your investments or controlling them. Good point here. If the advice you're getting is for free, you shouldn't expect better than average results. So that's pretty interesting. I wouldn't necessarily completely agree with that today. Especially with YouTube, honestly. There are so many people out there today that are providing amazing insights, especially for market analyzing the markets and seeing how different charts fit together. And with computers today, it's like you can learn so much, and a lot of it is free today. But so I don't know what he would say about all of that today. But anyway, maybe this holds up true. Maybe you shouldn't expect better results getting free advice. I don't know. All right. And again, I think this is mostly referring to, decisions made with, well, what should you invest in, especially in regard to stocks, mostly bonds as well. You don't find many people talking about bonds, even though they can be the most exciting thing out there. Oftentimes they can be. But again, the bigger point here is that, whatever advice you're getting, you really can't, it's not wise to take it blindly and say, oh, this person said I should buy this thing, and then go buy it. You really have to understand what you're getting, why you're getting it. And you either have to believe, like he said earlier in the chapter, that they are really an expert in that area, or that you yourself are an expert in that area, and it all helps you make your decisions, kind of a thing. But in the end of the day, as an investor, it's you that's in control and deciding these things, not just based on what someone else says. But anyway, and he says defensive investors can't pick well for themselves, but they can insist their advisor put them in high-grade bonds and stocks that aren't too expensive. So this is basically his advice of how to talk to your advisor. And he says, when you talk to your advisor, you should ask him, I want to be put in high-grade bonds, and I want to be put in stocks that aren't too expensive. Those are his two requirements. And when they do get too expensive, sell them. Be an intelligent investor. Anyway, and then last few points here. The aggressive investor will work, different from the defensive investor. The aggressive investor will work in active cooperation with his advisors, getting ideas explained well, and then passing his own judgment. So the main difference here is that the aggressive investor is going to be a little bit more, aggressive. And then, mostly depend on his own judgment and use his advisors as like a way of getting information. Whereas the defensive investor kind of leaves it to the advisor to simply do the work. But he says that, like I said, the defensive investors should ask their advisor to do those two things. Say, I want to be put in high grade bonds and I want to be put in stocks that aren't too expensive. Yeah. All right. So then we already talked about that last sentence. And then last point of the chapter basically comes down to, I think, that new issues are okay, but be careful with them. He's mentioned, I believe earlier in this book, that, when you have a new stock, you want the company to have a good earnings record before it is sold to the public, so you can determine if the price is a good price or not. I would suggest the majority of people involved with IPOs, especially of like popular companies like Reddit, for example. I brought up that example before. I would suggest that most of the people buying those stocks have no idea what valuations even are. They just think, oh, Reddit good, therefore Reddit stock, okay, I make money because Reddit stock good, Reddit stock grow. Like, that's the thinking. Instead of being like, okay, what's the debt of this company? What do they own? What's the earnings record? Just those three things alone can get you pretty far. And that's all we have for Chapter 10 of Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor, the Investor, and His Advisors. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Rob's Child.